we are opening session 3, which is about restoring nature in European cities. So here we are looking at the role of green infrastructure in relation to the biodiversity. We all know that Europe is currently facing an unprecedented loss of biodiversity. This is the reason why the European Commission launched an EU 2030 biodiversity strategy, and will also put forward a nature restoration law, which should both are aimed to hopefully increasing the biodiversity in Europe and in European urban areas. I'm very pleased to have here a very interesting group of panel of speakers. So briefly, with a short presentation. So first of all, thank you very much to Mrs. Jutta Paulus, a member of European Parliament from the group of the Greens. Then we have Benjamin Caspar, from Policy Officer in the Biodiversity Unit at DG Environment of the European Commission. Stephan Brenneisen, from Head of Research for Urban Ecology at the Institute for Environment and Natural Resources from Zurich University of Applied Science. Stephan is he will tell us about this great case of basil in Switzerland. Then we have Daniela Rizzi, Senior Officer for Nature-Based Solutions and Biodiversity at ICLEI Europe, a network of local authorities. And finally, we have Stephan Beerends from Sempergreen, representing industry, so a solutions provider, technology provider for green infrastructures, and for roofs and walls. I think I'd like to start maybe the discussion with Mrs. Paulus. I think she should be with us in the call. Unfortunately, I don't see the. Yes, I see Miss. Hi, hello, good afternoon. So starting with Mrs. Paulus for your let's say, so for setting the scene for this session. We know, and I don't think I have to tell you the issue we have with biodiversity in Europe. We know that the European Commission is putting let's say the institutions are working to try to address this huge problem. We have a nature restoration law forthcoming. It was expected to be with us already a few weeks ago. It is not being published yet. So my question to you is, what are your expectations from your point of view of the European Parliament on the upcoming nature restoration law proposal, and how do you think this piece of policy regulation could support the integration of green infrastructure in urban areas? And of course, in the framework of this question, also we would be very interested in understanding from your point of view on anything related to the discussion ongoing concerning targets for biodiversity. I think this is will be the key elements of legislation in this area. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yes, thank you very much, Luigi, and thank you very much for having me for this important event. I think it is really a great opportunity to reach out to participants and also to the public, because biodiversity loss is a planetary boundary that has been passed, but which is not as much debated in public as the climate crisis is. But I really recommend everyone to have a look at the planetary boundary study, which was first published in 2009 by Professor Rockström and others from the Stockholm Resilience Institute, and then updated. And if you look at the different planetary boundaries, you see that the biodiversity loss is far, far outside what this planet can bear for a limited amount of time, which is threatening the pure existence of human civilization. So I think it is high time that more than 20 years after the last real nature legislation, we are now facing a new legislation in the realm of nature conservation and also bringing back biodiversity to our lives. We have seen the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive in the 90s, and then the Water Framework Directive, but after that nothing happened. And we know that it was discussed within the Commission that the nature restoration law should more or less just set a deadline to the implementation of the other legislation. And we believe this is by far not enough, because just say, okay, what should have been protected and should have been managed in a sustainable way, we want to put pressure on the member states there. Well, that's something that we have to do anyway. But especially in the light of the last IPCC report on climate change mitigation, it is clearly spelled out there that without restoration of natural ecosystems which serve as carbon sinks, we will not be able to come on a 1.5 degrees pathway, because we need those nature-based solutions to help us mitigate the climate crisis. So what do we expect? What are our demands to the nature restoration law? First of all, of course, we need ambitious targets. The European Parliament has called for ambitious targets in several reports. In the Cesar Luena report, there was a call to restore at least 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030, and also of protecting 30% of marine and terrestrial areas, which is also mentioned in the biodiversity strategy. And after very engaged and long discussions with stakeholders, with scientists, I managed to formulate a paper which was then endorsed by the Greens group. What are our green demands here? And we found out that it might be useful not to focus on degraded ecosystems only, because from what we have seen for in the biodiversity strategy for 2020, we didn't have so very well spelled out demands and goals. So what happened? The discussion started. So after the biodiversity strategy 2020 was brought forward by the European Commission, immediately discussion started. Well, what does it mean pollinators should be protected? How should we do it? What measures should be deployed? And then a lot of time was lost. So our approach would be, let's not talk about degraded ecosystem, because then everyone will start bringing forward their own idea of what is degraded. Is there more degraded, less degraded, ultimately degraded? So we call on the Commission to set a target which everyone can understand, meaning 15% of the land area until 2030, 30% until 2040 should be restored. So if anyone has doubts on what the land area of his or her own member state is, they can easily look at a map and they can easily find out. So we would save a lot of time for the discussions. What we would also need is a clear definition of restoration. And this is a bit more difficult. And we really would like the Commission to engage with scientists here, because many people think restoration means wilderness. It does not. Among our most rich biodiversity-rich ecosystems, for example, are orchards, Streuobstwiesen in German, where you have a meadow with some fruit trees on and a lot of biodiversity in the meadows, and especially important for pollinators and also for small mammals. But this is not a natural ecosystem. It will never survive if it is not managed. You would need people mowing the meadows. You would need people tending the orchard. So in restoring this kind of ecosystem, we would not create wilderness. We would create sort of a secondary ecosystem which evolved through human activity in the past. And we have a plethora of ecosystems which have evolved just in that way. And so we are calling on the Commission to find a good definition of restoration, and taking into account that not all restoration should be going beach forests, which is nice, but which naturally we have a lot of biodiversity which is not really situated in forests. Also, we call on the Commission to strengthen the biotope network, and this is where green infrastructure in cities also steps in. I have learned a lot in the last years about our wild pollinators. Everyone thinks, when someone says bee, everyone thinks of honeybees naturally, but we have more than 500 species of wild bees and bumblebees, which often live solitary, so they are not at all comparable to honeybees, and they are not tended to as honeybees are. Honeybees are more or less some more comparable chicken or cows, because there is a person who owns the honeybees, who treats them in case of illness, who helps them survive. At how to protect those wild pollinators which are responsible for a large part of pollination also of our crops, and those pollinators often live in a very limited space, so they need possibility to feed, possibility to live, and they often travel only very short distances, and that's where green infrastructure in cities is also important. So not looking only at the private gardens, but of course also at the public green infrastructure, such as parks, such as the blue infrastructure, meaning small brooks, rivers, ponds, which can be designed in a way that biodiversity has a place to live there. And I found it very interesting. I had a webinar with the head of the European Environment Agency 2 days ago on green infrastructure in cities and how it is supporting people's health. Even a single tree is already supportive to people's health, and of course also to biodiversity. We should also aim for the nature restoration law to be additional to other efforts to bring back nature. So not putting simply a deadline, but also increase biodiversity on, for example, the agricultural area, by more organic farming, by pesticide reduction, by supporting permaculture, which is really supportive to a vast amount of biodiversity. Permaculture has the approach that giving a home to the predators, you can actually keep in, you can actually have a positive effect, so that you don't have to use pesticides, because the predators will take care of any bugs that might threaten your crop in that way. What we would also really need is specific target for different ecosystems. We have very valuable ecosystems such as wetlands, rivers, coastal area, and these will not contribute greatly to the area-based restoration targets, because usually they're pretty small. But so therefore we would need specific targets for these ecosystems, also forests and grasslands, because these are also the ones that will help us mitigate the climate crisis because of their ability to store carbon for a long time. And I have a very personal affection to peatlands, because peatlands worldwide store more than twice as carbons as the world's forests do. And unfortunately, most peatlands in Europe have been degraded. They have been drained for agricultural purposes or for settlements, and we need to re-wet as many of these as is possible. Of course, no one is willing to tear down villages that have been built on drained peatland naturally. But what we can do, and there we come back to soft restoration, we could find uses for re-wetted peatlands that allow human activities to still take place. I'm of course talking of polludiculture, which means you harvest the biomass which is above the ground, and you can use it to produce, for example, insulation material or single-use material for food, which is increasingly important as we do want to phase out single-use plastics. And in that way, we could give farmers an opportunity to still have an income, although the land is more or less given back to nature, so that biodiversity can thrive and that it can fulfill the carbon storage which we urgently need. Also, we have already in the biodiversity strategy the goal of 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers, and this of course should be translated in the nature restoration law. And there again we have as well climate mitigation, because river ecosystem also store carbon, but as well as climate adaptation. I don't know whether any of you have seen last year that we had a very big flood event in the middle of Europe, in my home constituency, to be very honest, where a lot of infrastructure was lost. People lost their lives, people lost their houses. And interestingly, part of this event was alleviated. So a part of the town of Trier was not submerged due to the fact that the small river was restored back to a more natural state further up. So there was, so to speak, where the water could go. So it didn't enter the city in such a big way as it would have done otherwise. So in this, by this example, we see that every euro we invest in restoration today could save us multiple times this amount by being preventive to those disasters, which are, I must say, prone to come with the accelerating climate change. We also call on the Commission to strictly apply these laws to these targets to each member state. There might be possibilities to do something like a trade-off, because we have member states with rather small land mass and we have member states with rather big land mass, and often the smaller ones are the richer ones and the bigger ones are not necessarily the richer ones. So there might be possibilities to have a trade here, but it should be clear that every member state has its responsibility and we can start trading afterwards. But we should not make the mistake to try and do it beforehand, because then we will have weeks and months of negotiations on this and we will never have this law passed in time. The plans that each member state shall make to show how restoration will be done must be assessed by the Commission, of course, and they must be assessed against firm criteria such as fulfillment of the targets, contribution to the connectivity of the network, achievement of the target on the EU's land area and sea area to be strictly protected, of course, climate change mitigation, adaptation, and also improvement of the conditions for pollinators, which is, I think, really important. I would like to stop here because I think I've already spoken too long, and thank you very much for having me. And I'm really glad that you're hosting this event.
Thank you very much. Very nice way to open and to start this discussion. I will come back to you with some questions, but before, maybe I'd like to go to Benjamin. So Benjamin, different point of view, European Commission, same topic. So I'd like to kindly ask you your overview of what actually is being explored in the framework, in the context of the EU Nature Restoration Law. I mean, as I said, it was supposed to be with us, to be adopted a few weeks ago. Maybe if you can also, within the limits of what you can tell us. And again, thank you very much for being with us. If you can give us your point of view, if possible, with a focus. Also, make us understand how this law could have an impact, or which kind of impact could have on the biodiversity in urban areas. I think because this is very much the focus of this panel, but obviously an overview, a general overview would be more than welcome. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thanks. Can you hear me? I've taken off my headset. I'm using this microphone. Okay, that's good. Well, I would like to listen to Jutta a bit more. I loved everything that we just heard. Although I'm obviously a civil servant, I'm not a politician. But if I was to, so I do what I'm told. But if I was to express an opinion, I would be voting definitely for our last speaker. But anyway, that's another story. And actually, the report that was referred to in the last presentation was really, really useful when we were preparing the biodiversity strategy, I have to say. So thank you very, very much for that. And it's nice to see all the points which were made. Now, we haven't adopted, or the Commission hasn't adopted, the nature restoration law yet, but I'm very strongly reassured and convinced and told that it will be adopted on the 22nd of June. So that's the current proposal, and I think that it will be. The delay wasn't anything suspicious because it's going to be adopted on the 22nd of June. There was just at that point a lot of things came in and everyone was a bit overwhelmed, so it got delayed. But it's going to be adopted hopefully with a package of other environmental measures. And unfortunately, because it hasn't been adopted, I can't respond directly to the different things, the calls in the Commission. But I think in general, most of the things which were discussed in the previous presentation will hopefully be in there. I mean, definitely, it's no secret that we're looking at different ecosystems and habitats and the different and having targets on all these different areas. So I personally, I think it's a really, really significant and exciting proposal, and hopefully it will come into force and will be, as was said before, a very significant piece of environmental legislation for this Commission. I think it is important to say, and I really support what was said. The nature restoration law isn't just to sit there on its own and then we wash our hands and say, well, that's everything solved. It's not. It's as it's been with climate change. It's policy. There's the emissions trading scheme. There were thousands of other things going on. We have to look at all different avenues on how we're going to address these problems. And in the biodiversity strategy, the nature restoration law is part of the package. There is obviously the expansion of the protected areas at land and sea. There is a massive increase in financing with the EU budget. There's a lot of mainstreaming, a lot of commitments that have to be taken up, not just by DG Environment, but by other departments. And we need to push and push and push and make sure that everything in the biodiversity strategy is taken up, because as a strategy, when we were sitting down and there was a really cool central team doing the strategy, but we were sitting down drafting it and talking to people and looking at things. It was the question which was asked from everyone, including the commissioner and the president, is like, well, what went wrong with the 2020 strategy? You know, why were those targets not met? What is different about this one? I've been 20 years in the Commission, and I've seen this cycle of strategies can become really depressing, because you look back at the strategy from 2000 and you go, hold on a minute, I've just drafted something which is exactly the same. So for me, there are some really fundamental differences. The increase in spending is very significant. It's obvious that nature and biodiversity are much higher political priority for this Commission than ever before. They're up there with climate change. They're one and the same thing. You shouldn't even talk about them as two separate policies. Again, and if this wasn't being recorded and I wasn't here in an official capacity, I would say the same department again. But I'm not going to say that. The nature restoration law, however, is a really, really important part of the package, and I'm super excited about it. And I'm really looking forward to the debate and the negotiations when, to some extent, once it gets published a little bit, we step back and then it goes into discussions in Council and Parliament. But I hope everyone takes this really, really seriously. Urban ecosystems are recognised in the biodiversity strategy and in the nature restoration law proposal. They will be, theoretically, as for their importance for biodiversity. So it's not, before they weren't urban ecosystems. People just thought, okay, urban, peri-urban, no, everything about nature is outside. No one thinks that anymore. Urban spaces can and are, they can be even more a haven for biodiversity, and then the multiple ecosystem services which we get from green infrastructure are more represented in urban spaces than anywhere else. The flood risk protection, the heat island effect, you'll have talked about them all. Everyone who's at this meeting, at this workshop, at this event will know about them. But I mean, biodiversity as well, and we're going to talk a little bit later maybe about pollinators, but you can have an amazing wilderness, or you can create, it doesn't have to be wilderness, you can create this amazing biodiversity haven and space and protection in cities, where, let's be honest, at the moment, you might be, if you were a little piece of biodiversity, less likely to encounter pesticides than if you were outside the city boundaries. So, which is something we also need to work on in general. So it's going to be on the 22nd of June. What will it hold? The nature restoration law for urban ecosystems? As I said, we have a multiple pronged policy for restoring, protecting and restoring ecosystems, and the nature restoration law is one part of it. It's not, I think you can expect something where we're looking at setting targets on stopping the loss of green space, increasing it over time, and tree canopy cover. We can't, obviously, for a nature restoration law, that you need to have it properly implementable. You can't go into enormous detail of a hierarchy of different types of biodiversity types within a city. But this is a place where I think if we have targets set for local administrations where cities are, and towns and suburbs, for the whole administration, it will change the way local administrations think about urban planning. We really need to just green urban planning. We want that greening is an integral part of urban planning. So you don't just, we called in the biodiversity strategy for everybody to develop urban greening plans in urban spaces over 20,000 inhabitants. Now, a greening plan isn't something you prepare in a few hours and you publish and you say, we've got a park there and we've got some bees and we're going to build an allotment somewhere. That's not an urban greening plan. That's just a little statement. An urban greening plan is something that is part of the planning process. It is co-created with the citizens, with all the key stakeholders. It is overlaid on your transport plan, on your water plan, on your, your parks plan and your housing and development plan and everything. It's an integrated part of the process. It needs a budget, it needs commitment, it needs people proper measuring and monitoring of things, and that's what we want to promote. Now, for me, step one with the nature restoration law, if we're setting targets on urban green, will mean that every developer in the future will have to say, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that the amount of green isn't lost, but is enhanced? We want to enhance biodiversity. We're not here to stop development. What we want to do is green development, green thinking, green planning, and green development. And that's why green infrastructure and green roofs and green walls and green car parks and green everything is so important. You can have, I mean, amazingly different types of new development. You can have completely grey, utterly depressing, very flood prone, hot, miserable developments where there isn't any biodiversity compared to what was there before. And you can have completely the opposite. I mean, you can have developments where you improve the nature and biodiversity from what was there before. But we really need to make sure that this thinking is incorporated, green infrastructure thinking is incorporated into all our development in the future. And that's what I hope will happen. But it's not just the nature restoration law, it's all these other steps, which I'll maybe talk about a little bit later when we've having a discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Then maybe we move on. So this was a nice overview of what is happening from a policy regulatory point of view. Now I'd like to go to Stephan Brenneisen. Stephan, I mentioned before when I introduced yourself, we had a chat a few months ago, and we discussed, I contacted you because I wanted to know how did you make it happen in Switzerland, in Basel. And there was now from some measurement taken in 2019, we learned that with the 5.71 meters square per inhabitant, the city of green per inhabitant, the city of Basel has the largest area of green roofs per capita in the world. Something has been done there. Can you please share with us how it was possible to reach this goal, and how the city supported the integration of green infrastructure, so that we can learn and help to transfer this knowledge, this experience across cities in Europe? Stephan, the floor is yours. You're muted, Stephan.
Okay, that was good. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. I'm very pleased, and also with the other colleagues. Yeah, it's really good round, and yeah, European Commission is always at different levels. For me, very interesting to see and hear what you're talking about. And of course, I could make it short. What we did, there is this Nike slogan, "Just do it." When it was just mentioned, we had the same concept 20 years back, and somehow we continued talking and talking and talking. And I think one main point was that we really made green roofs in the city of Basel mandatory. That is kind of, that was 20 years, more than 20 years back. And if I'm allowed to share my screen, if that would work.
Yes, it should.
So,
yeah.
Can you see the screen?
Yes,
so,
yes, we can. Maybe, yeah, presentation mode. Perfect.
Oh, okay. So my background, that's just a summary of a presentation I just had in Austria. I'm a geographer. And what I realized when I started my PhD, this flat roof building, the roofs, this is a free space from the spatial approach seen. Nobody was using it, you know. This is kind of, even Le Corbusier, Swiss architect, said that 100 years ago. It's a space, we have to use it. And what to be sure, what I found out is that there was kind of no interest. What can we do with that? And we found each other with the colleagues working in the city authorities that we can use this space for doing something for wildlife in Basel. That was my first test field, where I learned how do you create living spaces on roofs. When we talking nowadays, and the amount in Basel, for example, is like 15% of all the area is covered with building with flat roofs. And we call that roofs, if we make them green, this is an extensive green roofs. Should have a minimum of maintenance, minimum of investment costs for the building owners, for developers. That is a very important goal. And this also very important goals we always in history tried to follow when we created new concepts for green roofs. That was the first roof with like this approach of kind of a near natural habitat close to the river of the Rhine River in Basel. That was built in the late 80s. I found here red data book listed species. And that was like, you can see when you compare the picture, that was 25 years back. I went to the media when I found out that we have very interesting stuff on the roof. And I think the advantage is, from my side, was that I was coming from the academic world. I went to the colleagues from the city department and said, hey, come on, you are responsible for nature protection here in the city. I have a new tool, green roofs. So let's work together. And to be honest, it's quite simple. Basel is not so on. Of course, it's not simple, but when I would summarize, there was no strategy in the beginning to get to a certain goal. But the thing is, I think Basel is maybe enough small. So we have 200,000 inhabitants. So kind of, you know, the colleagues when you work for some years in the city, or you get around, you know everybody. So we close circle, and this circle, this was supported because we had also two campaigns that were raised in Basel to support green roofs. They twice during 1.5 years, the city supported installing of green roofs with, let's say, 40% of, with incentives of 40% of the investment costs. And after that, we saw when we stopped the incentives, the prices went down. There was a kind of a competition in the trade, and it's not always the same in Switzerland, but now the big cities got the prices that much down for creating a green roof that we could make it mandatory in all big cities in Switzerland. So this is a typical view when you see on a building, nobody can see beside the nature, birds, butterflies, and we have that in the building codes. And very important was, even it was not like strategy, but I know kind of naturally, if you want to get to the media and you want to get a good response, take the guy in charge from the city, and she should come also for your media event. And that was Barbara Schneider. She was responsible for the buildings in Basel, and she kind of, we found each other, and she came to all our media events. So the media were very interested in what we do. And we had once a very important round when I told her, see, Barbara, I have new findings, how we can create green roofs for nature. And she said, okay, let's do a meeting with all my bosses of departments. And we had that meeting, and then the colleagues, I would say, they said, would be quite, yeah, like normal, we make a nice brochure. And I learned from an Austrian colleague, they said, brochures is alibi, you know, that's everybody is doing brochure, and then I said, okay, job is done. And I said, okay, now that's not enough. And that was the first step that we said, we do it mandatory. And you see here the graphs, not even going to the actual numbers, but you see here, we had 2 campaigns. I don't, maybe you don't see it, or maybe here, that were very important. And we have like the building code started in 2000, that we really then, of course, we got in quantity. And this is what I always say, if you want to challenge a global problem like biodiversity or climate change, we have to talk about quantity in cities. So we have to make it mandatory. So security measures, other measures in buildings or building codes are mandatory. So we have to say greening the roofs, for example, about facades, maybe it's a bit more difficult. We have to make it mandatory, and it's possible, just do it. That's the same picture like in the installation, and we have to train the trade how you do that. You know, you can make it like very fancy, you know, your green roof. If you have the membrane under control, everything is nice. So you can be very creative. So really see and bring the picture. That's why I also wanted to show you the picture, because pictures are telling the story much better. Usually how you create such kind of habitats on roofs. And this is also my part of my main, how to say, way to explain architects, planners, everybody. That is pretty simple. You can do that. You do that for butterflies, for birds. And what an important, sorry, that's in German, but this is a part of the planning procedure in Basel. Still nowadays, I'm part of the planning procedure in Basel. So I have a mandate to consult the city and to consult all the planners. If they get a planning permission or a construction permission, they have to come to me to ask, is that right, what I'm planning? And I have to check that they do it, the green roofs, that I do it right, that they make it accordingly to certain rules that we defined additional to just a standard definition. I just don't bother. For example, you have to bring some woods, sticks, whatever. You have to use native plants, whatever. This is also defined in our planning procedure. So this is very standardized. We are playing a bit. We do a lot of such stuff also with our students. So it's a bit like Colleagues sometimes told me, like Stephen Peck from the US, when he was first time here in Switzerland, he said, you are a green roof terrorist, what you're doing. And then they say, oh, there's a carrot and stick approach, you know. I think, okay, I did that for 20 years and it worked pretty well, obviously, and people like it. Really, everybody is fascinated about that. We just measured last year to get them to an end. We have at the moment almost 2 million square meters of green roofs, of buildings with a flat roof that are covered with a green roof. If we calculate maybe 1/3 of the area that is covered usually with gravel or other technical stuff, we have 1.3 million square meters in Basel. So about 6,000 green roofs. And I just also summarize that when I started after my PhD, we had like 10% of the flat roofs have been greened, and now we are at the stage of 46%. So almost half of the flat roof buildings in Basel are green at the moment. We also, of course, have this problem dealing with solar, big discussion, not so easy. And it will be the same story. We just proved to people, hey, come on, it's worse. Under the solar panels, it's shade, it's more humidity. There is a place also for biodiversity. It's not a lost space. We got orchids. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, to be honest. For me, I have a nice group who's working with the topic. And I think that's kind of also what people feel. We have the spirit, we want to do something good. And it's really a free and open space, to make it simple. But you have to want it, you have to push it, and to tell the people, hey, now it's the time, you know, we have to do it, and we can do it.
Yeah. Stephan, thank you very much. Thank you. This was a very nice presentation. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, when I told Stephen Peck that actually you were one of the speaker in this European Green Infrastructure Day, he was very excited. So, so I still remember, you know, this visit in Basel. So really, really nice. Stephan, thank you very much. I think on the point of making certain decisions and introducing some mandating actually the integration of green infrastructure in the built environment. I would like to go back to this point, maybe after also with the Jutta, because of the work going on, the negotiations, for example, on the energy performance of building directive. Jutta, if you allow me after. So before let's complete this nice round with Daniela. Daniela, you know, you here represents a network of cities. I mean, tell us more about ICLEI, but you know, my question is, which are the keep us inspiring us in the sense, which are the main projects on urban green infrastructure that are ongoing, and the most important thing, which are the best ways do you think, or that you have from your work that you have noticed the best way to involve cities or local authorities, but also citizens to support the increase of the deployment of green infrastructure in cities, and consequently the increase of biodiversity. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Luigi. And I want to thank the organizer of this event. It's really, really nice to have such a mixed panel and with so different sectors. So that's exactly what we need to do. We need to get out of the bubble, right, and discuss with one another. I would like to share some slides so it's easier to make you visualize the presentation here. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah. Great. So I am based here in Freiburg in Germany. We are a city network, and we have many, many different ICLEI offices around the world. We are based here, so you can maybe see in the map here in Germany. And we have been working to drive cities and subnational governments around the world to become more sustainable. So we work in a number of development pathways, let's say. And I want to focus today a a little bit more in this nature-based development. And I'm going to talk a bit about the projects that we have been doing with cities to bring more planning, implementation, and stewardship of nature-based solutions in the urban environment. So I always like to show this slide. There are more than one definition of nature-based solutions out there. We work a lot with the European Commission's definition because a lot of our projects are European funded. And so these are solutions that are inspired, supported by nature. They are cost effective. They should provide at the same time environmental, social, and economic benefits and help build resilience. They're not only for cities, but they are also for other landscapes and seascapes, and they should be locally adapted, resource efficient, and also systemic. And a very important point of this concept that I really like to every time underline is that they must benefit biodiversity. So if you are in doubt, if what you're designing as a landscape architect, and I know that many are here following us in this Green Infrastructure Day, you just ask yourself, is my design helping biodiversity net gain or not? If you're doing, for example, a green roof, which is only green grass, and there are no efforts related to biodiversity, no, it's not NBS. So it's very important from a design point of view, this benefit for biodiversity and supporting a delivery of a range of ecosystem services. I think that Jutta and Ben already mentioned a little bit the policy landscape. I just want to call the attention that we are in 2022. This year has to be a key year for biodiversity. We had, of course, the pandemic happening. 2020 was supposed to be the biodiversity year, but we didn't have COP15 really happening back then because of obvious reasons. So we did have one round in Kunming happening last October, but this year, also in fall, we're going to have really let's say the big commitments, and the global biodiversity framework is going to come out of that meeting. So I think it's very important to mention that. And we have been trying to provide technical and policy support to our cities, so to bring them together, into this movement to have more biodiversity, and not only restore, but also to get biodiversity net gain where you don't have any anymore. So it's really about nature positive, right? So we have to bring things back as much as we can. So we work a lot with these policies. So the European Green Deal, which is the larger framework. Of course, as you mentioned, Luigi, here, the Biodiversity Strategy 2030, but also nature-based solutions can contribute massively for the adaptation strategy, for the forest strategy, the soil strategy, and others. I'm not going to go into detail here because I want to tell you a little bit about the projects. So we are involved a number of nature-based solutions projects. I think if we count here the logos altogether, there are 18 projects. The ones on the left here, these are concluded. Connecting Nature is concluding this. And here you see the different generations of nature-based solutions projects. So NBS for climate resilience and water resilience, NBS for urban regeneration. So in this project with Clever Cities and ProGirec, we work a lot with how you can activate citizens. So Luigi, that answers a little bit your question. So for example, we are working in areas of cities that are not really the areas that usually become green. So we are really working with refugees and with deprived neighborhoods that are usually very poor in green areas. And so we're trying to co-create green solutions for these areas. There's also this generation of projects from NBS Europe and China. So we are working here with our Chinese office and other partners there. The Connexus project works with Latin America. There is also the Network Nature project. This is a very important one to mention because it is, you can say, the mother of all the NBS projects. So it is it's a CSA. So it's an action that reunite all the outputs from these different projects under one roof. So one stop place to go to find all the outputs. There's also the Green City Accord. It has a lot to do with what Ben was mentioning before with the urban greening plans, the co-carbon project, so NBS for carbon sequestration, NBS for health and well-being. This project is focusing a lot on that, called Go Green Roots. The Upsurge project is focusing on NBS for pollution alleviation, so it has a lot of solutions for air quality. And then NBS for water management, NICE and multi-source. We're involved in both these projects. We had today a kickoff even of the NICE cities panel to have cities exchanging with one another on solutions for wastewater treatment via nature-based solutions. And then we are going to start soon this year the NBS Ed World. This is a proposal focusing on education and nature-based solutions, and also the Naturance project. It focuses on insurance and around NBS for disaster risk reduction. I want to mention some resources. So I did mention already the Network Nature CS. So it unites different resources from the different projects. But there's also the Cities with Nature initiative. This initiative has been endorsed by the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity. And you have more than 215 cities that are signatories at the moment. And this happens at a mayoral level. So these cities have really decided we want to do something for biodiversity. And what they do with this initiative is that they exchange on guidance and tools, and they show their biodiversity plans. So all the documents and all the actions that they're taking and the commitments that they are taking to make sure that they can help biodiversity and stop biodiversity loss. There's also the Urban by Nature program. I'm gonna say some words about this. So this program, we saw that many cities, but not only cities, but also citizens, businesses, also academic partners, that capacity building was a key point to make sure that nature-based solutions can be planned and delivered. So we have designed this based on this integrated management approach. So we do a series of webinars in different hubs around the world. So we created a program in Brazil, in the Caucasus, in Korea, in China, and now we have hubs starting in Spain, in Scotland, in Flanders, and also in Southeastern Europe. I would like to close here so that we can engage in discussions, saying that we put out very recently, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, this publication, The Vital Role of Nature-Based Solutions in a Nature Positive Economy. So we're very worried about greenwashing. I mean, we do have to speak about the elephant in the room and all the accusations that the nature-based solutions concept has gotten since COP26. We try to address in this report a lot of these problems, because we do see a lot of oil companies, claiming they're doing NBS, whereas they are putting out solutions that really do not help biodiversity at all, and that are even counterproductive for biodiversity. So, and this report tries to call the attention of how would our economy look like if we focus on NBS, if we create, the whole supply chains based on nature and contributing to a nature positive economy, and not the economy we have now, which is of course nature depletive. So yes, that's my contribution. I'm happy to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thanks. And I think I think this is a wonderful network, and there are some very interesting topics that have been discussed today. For example, from previous presentation, now on top of my head, for example, this combination solar green infrastructure, biosolar installation, or restoring the water cycle, the natural water cycle. I think some very interesting topic that we might probably find of mutual interest in conveying through this wonderful network that you actually have. Thank you very much. Daniela, we'll come back after to you with some questions. I wanted to close this first round with Stephan Beerends. Stephan, you in this group represents industry, represents a big player in the market. Actually, it would be also nice if you give us just a few references about the Sempergreen and the size of the company, because here I think we are also looking at we are discussing about something that is also probably an economic and growth is part of the economic and growth agenda, a sustainable growth agenda. So I would like to invite you, Stephan, to give us some examples of projects which have fostered urban biodiversity, but also from your industrial perspective, what are the obstacles that the company or you as players, manufacturers or installers or solutions provider face in the market, and what would you need from decision makers at the EU, also national level, to implement green infrastructure in urban areas? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Luigi, and other speakers for all the insights shared so far. Well, the proof is in the pudding, as I've seen before in the presentation of Stephan, among others, in Basel. Good stuff's happening, also with us. So you know, primarily we're a grower of sedum, but along the way, the previous years, we've developed a lot of specific biodiversity products to stimulate biodiversity in urban environments. And what I will do is I will share my screen to give you a few examples of the good things that are happening at the moment. Let me see. Can you see it?
Not yet. Yes, we can. Yeah.
Does it need to be in presentation mode, or is this clear enough? This is better. So this is actually a project that I showed previous year, but it's you know, the power of repetition is also very important. This is a urban area in a big city in the Netherlands, and it's surrounded by nature, by green. And what we did together with the project owner is placing green roofs. And thereby facilitating the options for all the animals in the surrounding area to hop from one roof to the other, you know, to rest a little bit, or to eat, or to drink, or even to reproduce. And in the course of events, we call it the stepping stone. So it's a concept that we're using in other urban or residential areas. To create a link between the nature around the houses and thereby increasing biodiversity. And of course, you know, all these green roofs help with all the other advantages, like cooling the surrounding area, helping with your water management and all that. But this is a very good case of stimulating biodiversity in a residential area. The next case was done together with Optigreen, and Optigreen was in the previous presentation. This is actually a theme park and a zoo. And what the project owner wanted to create was so the motto was culture next to nature. So what we did is create a very interesting architecture, and on the roof we placed an Optigreen multi-green system together with a biodiversity product on top of it. What's good for everyone to realize is that not every roof is capable of, there's a roof load capacity. And if you want to have larger growers on a roof, you need thicker layers. So also the load capacity needs to increase. And it's our conviction that everything which is green is better than gray. But obviously, these types of solutions enhance the biodiversity much more than the simple green roofs. And finally, an hotel which is very keen on being eco-friendly. They work really hard, so everything is electrical. They pick up their hotel guests with electrical cars. Everything is sustainable in the hotel, and they also implemented a green roof together with plants stimulating biodiversity on the roof. So a lot of good stuff is happening, and our clients talk a lot about nature inclusive building. But what you see in the process is that there, especially on the municipality level, that there are a lot of delays, especially when it comes to biodiversity, which for a lot of stakeholders, unfortunately, is still a soft subject to talk about. It's sort of a long-term thing, which is not urgent to everyone. So that's something that we're dealing with, yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion and talk about possible solutions to tackle these issues.
Thank you very much, Stephan. Okay, then we had a very nice and informative round of presentation. Now I have a couple of questions in the chat, in the Q&A, but also I had noted some down while you were presenting. So the first one, I would like to go back to Jutta for what I've already anticipated, in relation to the EPBD, because Jutta, this morning as well, I mean, we are very interesting in session 1. Of course, we were discussing about the built environment, and we have a wonderful opportunity there to because we are talking about stimulating renovation. We have the renovation wave, the Commission itself. In the conclusions of the renovation wave strategy, envision the decade of renovation where buildings will become our carbon sink. I think the vision is there. There are a lot of initiatives. Then we have an opportunity, which is the EPBD recast, and unfortunately, we don't see in the EPBD, at least from the proposal of the Commission, we don't see what we would have expected to see. So we were discussing and this morning, so we proposed, for example, one concept, which was the one of when defining the ZEB building, so the zero emission building, it makes sense to consider with an holistic approach a building that is indeed zero emission, that building that also integrates nature, or building at neighborhood level, I mean, the built environment. What do you think? I mean, this is now, we are in the parliament. This is a discussion that is going to start now, entering into the becoming, very relevant in the European Parliament. What is your point of view on something like that? Are you working on this file? How can we improve this proposal?
You're perfectly right. We need to improve this proposal. I'm not working on this file, but I was working on the NB opinion to the implementation report, which the European Parliament passed at the beginning of the mandate. It was pre-COVID. We always separate now in pre-COVID and post-COVID. So it's quite a while. And there I was very happy that I managed to include in the opinion that we were calling for when doing renovations, take into account what kind of green infrastructure could be included in this renovation concept. Of course, not only facade greening, roofs, but also possibilities where for nesting birds or for bats, because that's actually a trade-off in renovation often, because older buildings often have little, well, spaces where animals can get in and have their home. And of course, you don't want these little Rizzi, I'm sorry, my English is leaving me today. You want everything really airtight in order to keep the warmth in. But actually that deprives animals of these opportunities. So what we were calling for is, say, create something artificial so that those animals don't lose their home, basically. I found it very interesting that the citizens panel in the Conference of Europe also called for the protection of greener urban areas, and greening cities and urban infrastructure should be at the heart of the EU's climate and environmental ambitions for urban areas. That was an explicit recommendation of the citizens in the Conference for the Future of Europe. So of course, for us, this is very helpful because we can use this when amending the EPBD. And as I said, I will not be working personally on the EPBD, but of course I'm in contact with the colleagues who are working on it. And inside the Green Group, at least, it's common practice to co-table amendments that are very dear to the heart of a member who is not working on, who is not the shadow for the directive. So be assured I will bring in something on green infrastructure for new buildings, but of course also for renovations, where it's, in my view, even more important, because there you're already working on the building, you're already doing a plan. And I would go even further. We, in the EED, in the Energy Efficiency Directive, we try to bring in, we still have to convince the others, but never mind, we try to bring in that municipalities of 20,000 inhabitants and above should create a heating plan for their communities. And of course, in these heating and cooling plans, you could also look at what kind of green infrastructure could also be brought into this quarter, into this area. What is also useful for these areas? For example, the city where I'm from is surrounded by forest, more or less, or not surrounded, but there's a lot of forest in the vicinity. So it's even a biosphere reservation, Palatinate Forest, and north of Vosges, whatever. So it's a French-German biosphere. And so everyone says, oh, many trees around here. Why are you talking about green infrastructure in the first place? And so basically there, for this city, trees would not be the top priority, but rather we need meadows, we need blue infrastructure, we need elements that are not present in the close vicinity. And that's something where urban planning steps in. And I think we might need a bit of, well, how do you call it? Maybe education of urban planners, because urban planners are trained to look at how the architecture should look like, how public transport should be planned, how there should be recreative space for people, but not so much for nature. For urban planners, nature is often like, well, trees are pretty and people like them, but they don't look at it like as a real habitat for nature. And there, I think we will need to do a lot of education. And I think networking is of utmost importance here. In Germany, there is a network called Kommunen für biologische Vielfalt, municipalities for biological diversity. And there, people are exchanging, well, how did you do this? And how did you convince your population? And there are a lot of beautiful concepts, such as the edible city in Andernach, where there is real vegetables being grown inside the city, but also meadows and flowers and habitats for birds and bees and pollinators. And they have these meadows which formerly were mowed like once a week. Now they are more or less growing wild, but they are surrounded by a strip of mowed lawn so that it is visible. This is tended for, this is intentional. We're not being sloppy, we're not being lazy, this is intentional. And this strip of lawn is then surrounded by a strip of very colorful vegetables. You know, there are these certain breeds where you have like orange cauliflower and of course all sorts of cabbage in all colors, and it's really, really pretty, and tourists appreciate it very much. And I think these are the concepts which we need to share.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jutta. Thanks for this. I have a question in the chat for Stephen, the one from Jure Sumi. Was there, so I'm referring to Basel, so was there an opposition from investors / builders? If so, how it was handled? Stephan.
Microphone. I think there are two parts in the answer. The first is what we tried is to minimize the technical efforts to create a green roof together with the trade in Basel, the roofers, the roofing companies. And so we really minimized the prices to make a green roof compared to a gravel roof. So I think average franc be 10 Swiss francs per square meter. And this is then for most people, it's like, okay, that's not a reason to get a lawyer to get rid of any kind of regulation. I think that was pretty important. And my role was then important because I come from the academic world and said, this is possible to make that easy. Many companies working in the field, like the Optigrün and other German companies, they didn't like that, you know, because they usually want to sell products, you know. That's a bit the thing when you see a bit some details in other cities where it's not like rolling as well as in Basel. Maybe then not too much against like these companies, but I think the price is an important factor to get it really in the building code. And what was the second thing? Yeah, I think that was really the main thing. That, yeah, to make it happen.
So Stephan, is really, I mean, to address oppositions or problems, really, I mean, if I understand correctly, is really is the pricing, or is the sizing correctly the investment? This is essential to make these projects to make sure that they are accepted by investors and thank you very much.
Yeah,
Two questions for Benjamin. One related to the and I think you mentioned before the pollinator initiative. I think if you have something to share on this, because also this is a very important file. And which is, if I understand correctly, is under also revision or needs to be adapted. And then also another one related to the mentioned before, this greening, urban greening plans, which are mentioned in the 2030 strategy. So is there anything that the Commission is planning to do to push, to convince, because it is part of the document, which is great, but is there anything you're thinking to make sure that local authorities above that thresholds, I think is 20,000 inhabitants, actually implement these plans?
Yeah, thanks. That's a lot of stuff to. I'll very quickly on the pollinators initiative. I mean, we have actually developed guidance for cities on pollinators, and we did that with the World Green Infrastructure Network. So that guidance is available on the. I think that's really good. So there's a sort of step-by-step guide. It's for how you can get pollinators into your city, because I think it's worth mentioning that some green roofs. Some nature-based solutions can target adaptation and mitigation, but aren't necessarily as good as others for pollinators. So thinking about what type of green roof you have can be relevant for pollination. I mean, I think you probably all know that. There's a revision ongoing of the Pollinators Initiative, which is going to be realised in the second half of this year. There's an open public consultation currently open. And if you go to the Have Your Say website and search for pollinators, you'll find it. So I would call every and there will be pollinators as another thing that's covered, so that's worth thinking about. On the urban greening plans, I mean, that was a call in the guidance. No, a call in the biodiversity strategy was that every city should have, every over 20,000 inhabitants should have an urban greening plan. We've developed with ICLEI Europe and Eurocities a draft guidance. It's very much at the moment about the process, about mayoral commitment, about co-creation with citizens. It's about the whole process, and we with that there's a toolkit which over time we want to develop to be really useful for cities. Obviously every urban greening plan is different for every city, but we want to do as much as we can to support and help cities to do it. Obviously there's more money for research and know-how coming, and also then implementing your urban greening plan. But yeah, I think services for an urban greening plan, you would have, I love the idea of having heat maps, overlaying your green space maps for your planning, thinking about where your permeable and impermeable zones are, your flood risk management. So it needs to be part of your adaptation to climate change plan as well. So yeah, and of course, it fits in with the social aspect. You know, the sustainable development goals on green spaces in cities are also about access, public access, and that needs to be considered in it as well. But it's just, you know, these amazing co-benefits of green spaces and green roofs and in cities. I mean, I think that, I mean, I hope that every city in the future will look like Basel and like these other examples that we've had. I find them really no-brainers and super exciting.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, thank you, Benjamin. I think we have maybe just one last question from my side, Benjamin. Again for you, because you mentioned finance. Just for curiosity, is there any existing or structured dialogue between the DG Environment and I don't know, DG Regio or Recover for I don't know, the recovery plans? I mean, because there is, there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of public resources coming from the Commission. I was wondering, this is an agenda that really requires a lot of connections and interlinkages between different Directorate General. I think especially actually this morning, my colleague, the moderator, Kasia, in one of the sessions said something very interesting. She said, green infrastructure is really a great example of European Green Deal, because, you know, there are so many benefits and multiple benefits and aspects from different perspectives. So, and again, one of these connections, I think, should be made with those that, or the Directorate General that are actually programming or coordinating or making funds available. So is there any... I mean,
to start with, I totally agree with you. I mean, but it's unfortunately, it's not a perfect process. We have these different departments. We have to do one thing and then the next thing. My thinking, and I'm the one who's sort of in charge of the policy development of urban greening and nature-based solutions, is that I want to get this nature restoration law in place. I want to get the urban greening plan guidance out. I want to get it technically right. I'm now discussing with DG Regio how in the future the structural funding will then link to this. And what they say is, we've got the money, you need to tell us what framework we can put the spending in with their future urban spending plans and everything. But I think it's only going in one direction. I mean, it's only going in one direction. We need to be supporting green infrastructure and nature-based solutions as best we can. I found the presentation on the situation in Switzerland really, really interesting. The pricing, the the building, the way it's done, it's so advanced. I mean, it's a dream. Yeah, and I do think in the future, we need to, if we've got a nature restoration law in place, which is saying that everyone has to develop in a more green way and start to actually increase the amount of green space within city boundaries, then the next obvious step is to look at the building codes, isn't it? I totally agree.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, it's not just the building, it's the footprint of the building as well. It's the whole surrounding area. Often there's more land that the building is on for a retail outlet like a supermarket or something than just the building. So it's not just green roofs. We need to think about the green infrastructure surrounding the building as well. The car parks and things like that can be green or grey, and all that sort of, we need to build in, it needs to be part of that development process. But we, the Commission doesn't have competence to go down to every, or in any respect the capacity to go to every local authority and implement an urban greening plan. That there's only me, and there's like 20,000, 10,000 cities or whatever, over 20,000 inhabitants. So I mean, whatever, any good ideas that people have with next steps, etc., I'm really happy to talk about them and try and push them forward. But
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Okay, so we have we are nearly to the end of this very nice discussion. Maybe we have 30 seconds for each of us, just for final words, just a final note. Maybe I'd like to start with you, Jutta, for a final comment on this, and then we go on to nicely close this nice, interesting session.
Yes, actually, I would like to thank the panelists for their really valuable input, and also to the participants for their interest. And just as a fun fact, I mean, I'm from Germany, and we always are very proud of what we are doing for nature protection. We like to in front of the Court of the European Union for not implementing EU nature legislation, but never mind. And people tend to think that we have a lot of protected areas that are really well managed. Well, they're not. But what no one really realizes, that the area of private gardens is twice as big as the area of all nature protected areas. So if everyone would just in his or her own garden reserve a little space for nature, with dead wood, with maybe some wilderness, so to speak, creating a habitat for especially the solitary bees, which I love so much, then we already would help nature a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jutta. Daniela.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna maybe highlight something that I didn't mention in my presentation, and I didn't hear the other panelists mentioning it as well. I'm going to push here for standards, for NBS standards. I think it is very important for us to really have not only a definition, but a very clear set of standards to be able to measure nature-based solutions impact. Measure, you know, degrees that we can, you know, lower in urban heat islands, to measure also in terms of, you know, water quality improvement, air quality improvement, even noise. No? Green walls can also do a lot of, if you have the right mass, they can do also quite much for noise reduction. You know, so we need standards, I think, a lot. So yeah, I really am happy that the Committee for the European standardization, they're going to start working in standards for nature-based solutions, because we do have the IUCN standards at the moment, but they are not so technical. They're just guidelines, I would say, but we need more than that. We need really technical standards for NBS. So that's my push.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're right, Daniela. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Stephan, Beerends, final words.
Well, yeah, first of all, it's great to feel the, you know, the positive energy around this subject in this panel, and I hope also within the participants that are looking and listening to this this discussion. Further to Daniela's pitch, I think one of our biggest challenges in the industry, talking to our clients, is that we need to create proper business cases and talk about KPIs. And I think standardization will definitely help accomplish that. And then we can, speed up the progress even further. So yeah, I'm happy to think along with you on that track, because I'm convinced that will push everything forward even faster. So thanks everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephan. And Stephan from Basel.
Yeah, just quick. It's an invitation, so everybody can come, and I had good experience in last times from, I tried to get money from Present Switzerland. They are giving money to bring our technology to other countries. So I could just invite people from all over the world so far to come to Switzerland to show it. And I think that's important. We have now a nice project. We bring people from Austria, from Vorarlberg to Basel. In Switzerland, we show them what's going up. And what I realized in a bus, when the people are in a bus and you travel them around, it's getting very good discussions. You're very relaxed, you take the time, and you show the things. That was always fun. So yeah, maybe we can try to organize something, and that would be very pleasure for me, to bring the story further.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephan. We will really look into this. It's a great opportunity. So thank you very much to all of you for staying with us.